So, going back to what I was just saying that our two societies, our democracies are facing the same crisis, and which leads, of course, to political tensions in both countries. We have two presidents who, however different they may be by their age or by their profile and by their political leanings, actually both of them have been elected as, in a sense, populist leaders, which means as leaders who have been elected to make politics in a different manner. In the case of the French case, it was a populist campaign on the centrist platform, a pro-European platform, but fundamentally, President Macron really who was not a politician. And you know, in France, to be president, usually you have to be around for 30 years. In this case, he has never been elected. He was not a politician, and nevertheless, he was elected. And it may explain also why our two presidents, how different they are, have a good relationship. It's because there are two mavericks who have been elected through the same anger of the voters. So once you have, that's the first reality. The second one is that the French president has a strong majority in the parliament, is there for 3 years, is very well determined to reform the country, and which creates a particular situation in Europe a bit by chance, which means that France is a bit by default right now the natural interlocutor, European interlocutor of the United States, because the UK is facing the very trying challenge of Brexit, which is, of course, really is calling all its political energy to solving this problem in an appropriate way for the British interest. And on the other side, you have seen this morning the declaration of the German Chancellor. So it means that, again, by a sort of default, we are, for the moment, a very important interlocutor of the United States. And as you know, in politics, you have to be pragmatic. It's not a question of feelings. And in a sense, we are delivering. What does it mean that we are delivering? It means that the French soldiers are right now on the main battlefields against terror. We are with the Americans. We are deploying 4,000 soldiers in Africa right now, facing the terrorists in the Sahel region. And the Americans are supporting us. And we are the main contributor to the military operation in the Levant, really side by side with the Americans. I should say simply because the security in the Levant is critical for our own national security. So you have seen President Macron was the first one to be invited to a state visit by President Trump, and the relationship between the two countries is quite strong. So which means that so far we have been sort of good at avoiding really confrontations and reaching what I call gentlemen's disagreements, and which is a diplomatic quality. So that was my short introduction.
Short and I think very, very informative. I would like to follow up with your observations about the United States, because you, as an ambassador, you have a unique kind of position where you talk to people on all sides of the political divide. You hear the candid views of Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, never-Trumpers, and administration officials. How do you read the American political situation today? How much trouble are we in?
No, in a sense, I am privileged because I'm not an American in observing what is happening in the US in the time of intense polarization. I should say, for me, the first element I want to emphasize is how emotional are the Americans today on both sides. And which means that really basically people are launching epithets at each other, really are more in a sort of moralistic tone than the political one. And I think it's especially, I should say, for the Democratic side, for the Democrats, really, I think that what has happened in this country, what is happening in all the democracies, is calling for a political response. So I guess it's not enough to say that I don't like the person. I think it's much more important to say, actually, I don't like his or her politics, and actually, if I was elected, that would be the politics. Which means taking seriously, into account seriously, what the voters have said, the anxiety they have expressed, the demands they have presented, and to try to basically to articulate a policy. So my advice would be be less moralistic, which is very French, be more political.
That's right. So that's very good. French ambassador advises Americans be more French. It's probably good advice right now. You mentioned Brexit, and this is clearly an issue that has been rumbling along for a long time. The EU seems to have been moving a bit in the direction of a softer approach. The British, on their part, don't seem to have much of a consensus at all. Where do you think this is going? And is there any kind of a positive role the U.S. can play, or should we just sort of wait it out?
Of course, we do regret, the decision of the British. It's frankly, according to us, it's a lose-lose situation on both sides of the discussion, the British or the EU people. And it's a waste of energy, especially at a time when the EU is facing so many different challenges. Really, it's a self-inflicted crisis. The British have decided to leave. It's their decision. Secondly, they have also set red lines. They said, we don't want any competence of the European Court of Justice. We don't want free movement of people, and we want to be able to negotiate our own trade deals. So for more than 1 year, we have said, considering your red lines, what we can offer to you is a free trade agreement, the way we have signed a free trade agreement with Canada. Of course, for the British, it's a loss. They had full access to the wider free trade area in the world, and now they are going to have, to be treated like the Canadians towards the European Union. And as they are good diplomats, they want to have the cake and eat it. So basically, they have been knocking at our door now for 1 year, trying to really to say, oh, we want a bit more on that, more on that. So that's the first problem. The European Union is a set of norms. You take off the norms, there is nothing really left of the European Union. It's not a territory, it's not a nation, it's a set of norms that the member states have accepted. So we can't change the norms, which are the basis of the European Union for the sake of the UK. So we have always repeated to the UK, free trade agreement, but nothing else, considering your red lines. The second problem is, of course, the British are negotiating with themselves because there is a lot of disagreements between them. Really, it reminds me when, as a poor French diplomat, I was negotiating with the Americans. Because the Americans are first, you have what you call the interagency process. So you have this process, interagency. Usually you are waiting the result of the process during 3 months. And at the end, the Americans are arriving with the result, and they say, oh, please don't touch it. Don't negotiate it. You know, it was too tough to negotiate. The British are doing a bit the same. You know, really, they are spending weeks and months, you know, fighting, negotiating. And after that, you know, covered of blood, they came to us with a problem. They say, please don't. Of course, we are not obliged to accept it. So it's a complicated negotiation because of the British political situation, because the complexity of the issue. You know, in 40 years, hundreds of agreements actually have been negotiated between the UK and the EU, and you have to cut all these links. So it's really it's very messy. And when you have a negotiation, also, it's very important to know that closer to go you get to the dateline, more melodrama you have. So there is melodrama, there will be melodrama, doors will be slammed, chest will be banged. You know, really, that's the part of a negotiation. But I'm quite, really, I do believe that at the end of the day, we will have an agreement. It's really the interest of both sides are such that we will have an agreement. As you know now, the point is the Irish border, because if the UK is leaving the European Union, there will be a hard border on the Irish border, and which will be contrary to the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement was negotiated when the UK was in the EU, so it was quite possible simply not to have a border anymore between Northern Ireland and Ireland, or not an apparent border. Now it will be more complicated. So that's the point of the negotiation. Again, there will be still a periods of tension, but I'm quite optimistic about an agreement.
Well, we've talked about the difficult negotiating partner to one side of France, and then on the other, you have another, I think, where President Macron, really at the beginning of his term in office, made a very impassioned call for a renewal of Franco-German cooperation and almost a relaunch of the European Union. And at the time, the Germans were saying, this is very nice, but we're having an election. Talk to us after the election. Then after the election, well, we have to have a coalition. Talk to us when the coalition is formed. The coalition was formed. This coalition is still very new, and we need some time. And now it looks like, well, our coalition is breaking up, and we still can't talk very much about Europe. How do you get a process going because in some ways this is an even better strategy for not negotiating than the British or the American one?
You know what is striking for somebody of my generation is the question of the future of the European Union. For my generation, the European Union was a moral imperative, something that nobody could really even discuss. We had been invaded 3 times in 70 years by the Germans. Our territory has been devastated, so we reached, I guess, two conclusions. The first one was nuclear deterrence. We needed nuclear deterrence because in time of danger, you are alone, and we were alone in 1940. And the second one was never again. And so it was the reconciliation with Germany. I was educated, like all the French, in a fiercely anti-German family. And that was, of course, the feelings of all the French. And nevertheless, there was a sort of a will to say, again, never again, we have to build Europe, And the problem maybe is that we have been too successful, which means for the young Europeans, the idea that Germany could be a threat, of course, doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense. So the question mark is, why European Union? What is the use of European Union? So you can say it's very good for prosperity because it's the larger free trade area in the world, but frankly, it's not with that you excite the enthusiasm of the crowds. And especially at a time where there is what the populist wave. And here, the populist wave has Washington, D.C. and Wall Street as a targets. In France, in Europe, it's Brussels, because Brussels appears as, really the beacon of globalism, really opening the borders, really signing free trade agreements with everybody. So the populist anger is mainly directed at, not only, but mainly directed against Brussels. So the question that we all have to answer is how to convince our citizens that the European Union remains of a critical importance for our security and also for our prosperity. And again, the jury is out. At the same time, you may see that countries which are actually experiencing populist or neo-populist really governments like Hungary or Poland actually are not talking about leaving the European Union. And Prime Minister Orban has been very keen on saying that really they don't want to leave the European Union. And also beyond all this name calling the name callings of our times, the fact is the European Union is muddling through in a very EU way, which is not very glorious, but it's muddling through, creating, for instance, border guards, European border guards, and trying to also to respond to the anxieties of the citizens, and including on immigration. So again, it's tough, but we have to move forward. And going to your question, it's true that Macron has really basically has made Europe has, in a sense, is waving the flag of Europe. And it's not very easy. You said, because usually we were working with Germany, and it's true that Germany is going through right now through a particular moment, but you have also had the Italian elections. So in a sense, what will be a test will be the European elections. There will be elections to the European Parliament, I think in May 2019, and Macron is trying to set the stage in terms of nationalists against Europeans. And he's trying to he has been creating a party with other European leaders, especially leaders, the Prime Minister of Netherlands, for instance, Mr. Rutte, or Scandinavian leaders, really to have to present a sort of center or center of the left platform, really against the nationalists. The result of the elections will be important in themselves because the European Parliament has some powers, but also the message that these elections are going to send. But there is a book has been written about Macron called "At the Same Time," because en même temps. Because he is, usually when you ask a question to the president, he's saying, "Oh yes." The answer is A, and you say, oh, that's a right-wing answer. But he said immediately after that, he said, mais en même temps, at the same time, it could be B, which is a left-wing answer, which means that he's trying to really to make a sort of synthesis, une synthèse of the different possible responses. He's not prisoner of a political line. As I've said, he's different. He has been elected in a different way, and he wants to be different. So yeah, there are some measures you say, oh, that's right wing. Some measures it's left wing. In a sense, he has understood that the debate is not so much right against left, that the debate, as you know, about what the far right is saying, globalist against nationalist. And he wants to be part of this debate. He's accepting is accepting this debate. But at the same time, for instance, on immigration, he has a bill voted by the French Parliament, which was quite restrictive. And also he is using also, the symbolic signals also, for instance, of commitment to the nation. The flag, national ceremonies, the celebration of the centennial of the First World War. So he's also aware of the anxieties of the citizens and trying to respond to these anxieties.
Talking about Italy then, the third problematic neighbor of France in a sense, how will France respond to the Italian position on its budget?
I'm going to have a very courageous answer. That's the competence of the Commission. That's the Commission to handle this issue. First, as you can guess, our bilateral relationship with Italy is, for obvious reason, is totally critical for us. France, I think, is the first or the second investor in Italy. Our major companies are really linked. And there is also that we have to manage together the question of immigration through the Mediterranean Sea. So there are some, again, name-calling between Paris and Rome, but at the end of the day, we'll have to cooperate. I noticed, as I've said for the Prime Minister of Hungary, that the Italians have never said that they want to leave the European Union. Really, and the question they are asking, in a sense, has been a question which has been hovering, for some years, which is to say that the austerity policy, which is really that has been imposed on Europe now since 2010 or 2011. You have a lot of people who are considering that this austerity policy has, in a sense, had a very destructive consequence on the economic growth and the economy of the member states of the Eurozone, which means on the fabric of our society. It's a debate which is going through all the European countries, especially in the South, saying, it's a northern imposed austerity, and we have to put an end to it.
I'd like to ask you one more question on my own behalf and then give the audience a chance. And this would be, we've noticed a dramatic turn in U.S.-Chinese relations. Standing pretty much where you are sitting, Vice President Pence, a couple of weeks ago, gave a striking speech about U.S.-China relations and talked about a whole-of-government approach in the U.S. to counter China's Chinese policies. And there have been a number of other steps before and after that suggest a turn of U.S. policy toward a much tougher approach to China. From a European perspective, from a French perspective, how does all this look, and how do you see this line of administration policy shifting world politics, if at all?
There are a lot of people who are saying basically that power politics are back. I think they've never left the stage, really. But we believe its power politics are back simply because so far for the last decades, power politics was overwhelmingly in favor of the West, and especially of the US. And the fact is that we are simply seeing a rebalancing of the world between world powers. Obviously, China is on the rise, and that's less obviously, because we can discuss it, in comparative terms, the US is in decline, in comparative terms, even if the US will remain the main power for the decades to come. So it's always, it's not to you that it's always a difficult moment, how to define a new balance between this emerging China and on the other side, the US and the other powers, Japan, Russia. So it's really, it's not abnormal that we hear tensions. For the Europeans, but it has always been the case for the Europeans. They know what is power politics. You know, really, we nearly invented power politics, and but we consider that multilateral institutions, international law, are a way of civilizing power politics. You know, really, maybe hiding, you know, under a cloak of decency. The reality of the balance of power, but also creating frames for negotiating. And that's the reason why we are so much committed to multilateral approach to international organization, but without any, without any naivete. We are not naive. So sooner or later, we will have to define, you know, we were expecting a definition of this relationship, which is now the major relationship, which is between China and the US. You know, it had to come. There was a phenomenon, you know, it was a crystallization moment. You know, the speech of Vice President Pence was a crystallization moment, but the trends were there, you know, really, and what we have, again, on our side, we of course we do hope that after this crystallization, there will be between China and the US, there will be a dialogue, you know, really leading to partial deals or agreements and so on. And I think it's the interest of everybody to reach agreements or compromise between China and the US. What we have told the US, but we have told the US that on the trade issues, we were ready to work with the US, because it's true that there are real questions which are raised by the Chinese behavior. Real question about intellectual property, market access, public procurement, and that there was also other questions about cyber security. We consider that we should set the standards together, that if we don't do it with the US, again, the risk is that China will set its own standards, which wouldn't be very friendly towards the democratic values and towards our national interest. So we had ideas about reforming the WTO because we consider, again, you know, really this administration and these presidents are raising a lot of legitimate questions. The behavior of China in the trade field, for instance, you know, we have been whispering about it for the last 20 years. And so it's really a real question. The WTO. Also, the WTO, you know, and the previous administration was already unhappy about the WTO. It was not appointing judges to the court of the WTO. So, but why not reforming the WTO? We are ready to work with the US to reforming the WTO. So again, there are really, again, there is this very special, unique relationship between the two powers. But on the European side, we are ready, as I said, on some issues to work with the US.
Great. Well, thank you. Enlightening as always. I try to call on as many people as I can. Let me remind you, though, that you need to ask questions. Questions are short statements that would be punctuated by a question mark at the end. So please, no statements or long comments. Identify yourself briefly. And we have microphones? Yes. So wait for the microphone. This young man here in the front. I'm sorry, probably you all look young to me. I don't know.
That's fine. Bonjour, Monsieur Ambassadeur. Francois Reyes from Washington University. I was wondering, what's your take on the Iran deal? The lead negotiator, should the European Union stay on it? If the US is leaving, the secondary sanctions are coming. How can the European Union better deal with it?
You know, on the Iran deal, we have a fundamental political disagreement with the United States. It's fundamental. It's not a question of business. It's a political question. We disagree. We have to admit it. We consider that the decision of the US to get out of the Iran deal was a major mistake, period. Which means that we do believe that the Iran deal was, of course, it was not perfect, but it gave us a lot of means of monitoring and limiting the Iran nuclear program. And we had told the Americans, and we had told the previous administration already, that beyond the Iran, the nuclear issue, there were a lot of other issues that we had to face as for the Iranian foreign policy. And with this administration, actually, we, the Europeans, we are negotiating with the administration about an agreement on how to handle the terrorist, missile activity, and regional activities of Iran. There was a negotiation going on, and we considered we were at 90% of an agreement. So our position was clear. We keep, and we actually implemented very robustly the Iran deal. And at the same time, we work together, the Europeans, the free Europeans and the European Union, with the American to address the other issues which are, of course, are real issues. And in a sense, more real issues for Europeans considering our geography. So we were there. This administration has decided overnight, you know, really to denounce the Iran deal and basically to sweep away the negotiation that we had been conducted. Okay, so here we are. What we are trying to do and what we have been repeating to this administration is that if the Iranians leave the Iran deal, what are we going to do? You know, really, basically, when we signed the Iran deal, it was basically to say, you know, really to avoid facing the alternative between bombing Iran or an Iranian bomb. That was what we were trying to avoid, and we believe this agreement was a way of avoiding this very really unappealing alternative. So what the Europeans are trying to do right now is trying to convince the Iranians to stay in the Iran deal. So far, they have accepted it. When the new American sanctions are going to eat, and apparently they are going to eat very heavily the Iranians on November the 4th, I don't know what the Iranians will do. But again, if the Iranians decide suddenly to go back to massive uranium enrichment, what are you going to do? You know, it's really, that's the real issue. So for the moment, we have convinced the Iranians, we have a very intense dialogue with the Iranians. Of course, it's really politics, it's also domestic politics. And the fact that the Americans are sanctioning European corporations which were engaged into totally legitimate trade in Iran, you know, selling cars or really the normal trade, has, of course, political consequences in our public opinion. Our public opinion is totally outraged that the US could punish foreign companies doing legitimate business in a foreign country. Extraterritoriality of the American sanctions, it's more and more difficult to accept by the European public opinion. And we have also to take into account the European public opinion. So what we have been telling the Americans was, okay, on one side, the nuclear deal, disagreement, we disagree. So let's see whether we can work together on the other issues, But it's also difficult on our side because of the public opinion. And it means also that we are expecting our American friends to make some gestures. For instance, the humanitarian goods. Of course, humanitarian goods are not sanctioned, are not under American sanctions. But the fact is that the banks are so terrified by the sanctions that they don't want to do anything with Iran. So it means that there is a strong risk that in a few months, really there will be shortage of medicine in Iran if we don't do something positive to solve this problem. So again, it's a difficult dialogue. We want, again, we are, it's a bit weird because we have the same diagnostic of the Iranian behavior. And as you know, we have expelled Iranians because they were trying to organize a terrorist act actually on the French territory. The French, we have been always very tough with Iran, but we do consider that this way of what has been decided by the United States makes our action against Iran, balancing Iran, more complicated.
More questions? Let's see. In the back there? Yes. We'll get a microphone to you. Introduce yourself.
Ashlyn Cobb, American Enterprise Institute. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I was wondering if you have any insight on the French-Russian relationship, and more specifically, if France has any hopes for the upcoming Trump-Putin summit and the INF treaty in general. Thank you.
It's really, first I start by a small remark, which is, I don't know, it's indicative a bit of the United States. You had, on Friday, I guess, you had a summit in Istanbul between the French president, the German chancellor, the Turkish president, and the Russian president to talk about Syria. France, Germany, Turkey, Russia. Don't you think that somebody is missing there? And it's very true. It's very strange because for us it was a major event. It was hardly covered by the American press. Hardly covered. It's really. I want only to emphasize this point because we, as a good embassy, we had to send a report about the reaction of the American press, and frankly, really, it was not that. The relationship with Russia is, in a sense, for the Europeans, as you may know, it's a platitude, but Russia is an important country. At the same time, we don't see Russia as the USSR revisited, for the only reason that the Russian power is not a global threat to Europe. Basically, if you had the military budget of Germany, France, and the UK, it's more than twice the Russian military budget. So Russia is a partner. Russia is also raising some, I should say, political problems in Crimea, in Ukraine. What was in Georgia in 2008. So we have problems with Russia, but Russia is not a major, really unifying threat the way USSR was. Second point, our trade with Russia is 10 times the American trade with Russia, really. So it means also that for us, we have also legitimate business interest in Russia, business interests which are quite important. And by the way, the sanctions that which have been imposed on Russia after the annexation of Crimea and the interference into Ukraine has been much more costly for the Europeans than for the Americans because of that. Actually, our agricultural sector, which was a major provider to the Russians, has suffered. So we have done the job, really. So once what is foreign policy? Foreign policy is talking with your adversaries. So we have to talk with the Russians. We have to find with President Putin whether there could be compromise between the way they see their interest and the way we see our interest. To be frank, when President Trump was elected, actually we considered it was a very good idea to have a personal relationship between your president and the Russian president, because it's really through Vladimir Putin that you can have an influence, an access to the real decision-making process of Russia. And it is what the President Macron has been trying to do. And it's exactly what happened also in Istanbul. And because here we are going into the conflict in Syria. As for Syria, and for some legitimate reasons, the Obama administration and the Trump administration have limited have limited their intervention to fighting ISIS, basically, really, and the two administrations have not been very active going further than fighting ISIS. For us, what is happening in Syria has critical consequences on our national security, either through migrations, but also because of terrorism, which means citizens of our countries going to Syria and coming back. So we have for these reasons, we could feel much more urgency, maybe than the Americans, into solving this conflict. And the fact is, whatever we like it or we don't like it, that Russia is in Syria. The fact is that in military terms, some people could say that Russia and the regime have the upper hand, and that we are really close to the last stage of the crisis, which is the fall of Idlib. Idlib is 14,000 jihadists, it's 2 million of civilians. If the Russians and the Syrians attack Idlib, it will be more than 1 million of refugees really going to Turkey, and on the top of that, thousands of jihadists scattered in the nature, as we say in French. So you can understand that for Europeans, it's a totally unacceptable prospect. So since the Turks and the Russians have been working on this issue with our German friends, we have seen what we can do on Idlib and also on a political transition, which could be, in a sense, consolidate a ceasefire and maybe a peace process in Syria. So we don't have any illusion about Russia. Really, we see the military activity in the Baltic airspace, the military activity in the North Sea. Actually, we have reinforced our military presence. We are contributing to the NATO battalions in the Baltic states. We have forces really also trained in Poland. But at the same time, we have to talk. Really, we have to speak with the Russians. And it's what we are trying to do. And so the idea of having, a summit in Paris or in Buenos Aires between the two presidents, it's a very good idea.
All right. Yes, sir. The microphone.
Thank you. Julian Borgia from The Guardian. What's been the response of the administration to your European requests on making a bigger effort to exempt humanitarian goods from the sanctions, and how big an impact is November 4th going to have on transatlantic relations if the US pursues extraterritorial actions against European companies?
As for the humanitarian issues, we have not, we have not actually yet received a precise answer. For instance, the question is really the designation maybe of an Iranian bank with which it will be allowed, we could be allowed to make, really to have a relationship, because for the moment the administration says, we said publicly that humanitarian, really it's possible to sell medicine and food to the Iranians. And what our question was, no, you need to be more positive to say how to do it, because if you don't say how to do it, the European banks will not do it. So we are waiting for a technical answer. We know that the Americans are thinking about it, really. As for the sanctions on November the 4th, first, I don't know what will be their extent. But I should say now that, in a sense, we have swallowed 95% of the bitter potion. But if there is something totally really unexpected, I don't think that November the 4th will bring more bitterness on the transatlantic relationship in this field. But Americans may surprise us, really. That's the quality of this country.
Let's see, one more question. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Michael Smits. I'm at the Washington Free Beacon. I'm a French national, but a recent American citizen. I appreciate you being here. The European Court of Human Rights recently ruled the Austrian case about blasphemy, that the woman ES's comments about the Prophet Muhammad weren't protected speech and sentenced her either to a fine or time in prison. I wonder what your government's response has been, and I wonder also, with respect to recognizing the legitimacy of the court and of that ruling, were a French citizen to be found responsible for the same crime elsewhere in the European Union, would the French government respect the decision and potential incarceration?
Well, I think it's typically a very polemical, in a sense, issue. And to be frank, I read it in the press, but I didn't read the decision of the court. And as you know, it may make a real difference. So I don't know what is the exact text of the decision. So I really so I can't answer to your question. As permanent representative to the United Nations, I spent 5 years, defending the rights of the Frenchmen to insult Virgin Mary and really Jesus Christ. Really, which is a bit strange, because Charlie Hebdo, Charlie Hebdo was this newspaper, was victim of the terrorist attack, basically because he had insulted, and it's true in a very crude manner, Muhammad, the prophet, but he had insulted much more, really the poor Pope, that he submitted to a lot of indignities I couldn't describe here, or Virgin Mary and so on. So there is a big tradition on in France, as you know, to be anti-religious, to be frank, because people don't understand it. It's one of our major difference. Is your secularism is to protect the religion from the state. It was really your founding fathers didn't want to have an established religion. So really your secularism was to prevent the state to impose an established church, while our secularism was to protect the state from the church. During one century of fighting from the French Revolution between the Roman Catholic Church and the French state. So there is a sort of a twist, an anti-religious twist in our secularism that we have to recognize. Really, it's you will never see a French president swearing on the Bible. That will be the end of his political career. So it's really, so it's very different. So again, I have to look at it, because I was also struck by this decision. But when you are struck by such a decision, saying basically you can punish somebody because he has insulted a religious figure, you said, no, it's not that simple. It's not possible that the European Court of Justice has taken this position, really. So I'm ready to have a look at it and to answer to your question after that. Really, it's you're French. Yeah, really. I saw you arriving. I was sure you were French. Really, so even with American nationality, you can't escape.
Great.
Had even a more tart comment about that on Twitter.
Well, Twitter is an interesting medium, and I think the ambassador and I have both found that Twitter is sometimes best avoided.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Well, listen, I think we're all grateful to the ambassador for really generous and open conversation, diplomacy at its best, and hope to see you here again soon for another conversation with another one of our Washington-based diplomats. Thank you so much.